Windows Server 2008 Enterprise, and we want to log in and look at configuring permissions at the share level and network level in Active Directory. So log into Pirates as administrator with administrative privileges. And for what we're doing, at least for the time being, we will require administrator privileges. If we had logged in as somebody else, we could right-click and select Run as Administrator. But since we already have those privileges, we're just going to go right into Active Directory Users and Computers. One of the first things I would do if you're doing, going in here for the first time, I have Advanced Features checked, but that's not enabled by default. So you would see this on your first install. And I want you to just notice a few things. I'm going to right-click on Super Spies, and all of these organizational units are treated like folders. But notice there's no security tab here. I can't see ACEs on the DACL, access control entries on the discretionary access control list. But if I enable Advanced Features, and then I right-click on Super Spies, notice now there's a security tab. And in this way I can edit ACEs on the DACL. Another thing, another feature that goes with Advanced Features, one of Microsoft's new features we'll take a look at is protection, basically OU deletion protection. And we'll do that. Let's create an OU here. Notice this checkbox, protect container from accidental deletion. By default it's checked. I could uncheck it and it wouldn't be enabled, but it's a good idea. It's just kind of like setting write protect on a secure digital card or a disk. I'm going to go ahead and make a child object, and again, protect container from accidental deletion. So now I have two objects here. Now, if I were to go and delete that object, properties, there's nothing here that would seem to indicate that deletion protection is on that object. So I go and I delete it, and then all of a sudden it tells me I don't have sufficient privileges, or the object is protected from accidental deletion. Now, I do have privileges, so it's protected. Why can't I see it? And how do I unprotect it? So I can clean up my Active Directory. Well, again, go back to View, enable Advanced Features, go down to your organizational unit, and right-click on it. And now, in addition to the Security tab, you'll see the Object tab, and there you can uncheck Protect Object from Accidental Deletion. And when you do that, you can just right-click and delete, and it's gone. Now, something else I want to show you. I'm going to leave Advanced View on, make another organizational unit. Again, we'll just call it child. Same name, but it'll have a different SID. What if I, want to delete a parent and the child object is protected? I'll go to the Object tab, I'll uncheck Protect Object from Accidental Deletion. Watch this. Now all of a sudden it tells me object parent contains other objects. Are you sure you want to delete the object parent and all of the objects it contains? So I would say yes, use delete subtree server control. That kind of conveniently just wipes out everything under that parent object. So it's kind of a nice new protection, nice new feature in 2008. Okay, now that we're in Active Directory Users and Computers, let's go ahead and create a hierarchy. So we'll use an organizational unit structure. Now you can use domains and subdomains, but Microsoft recommends using as few domains as possible. So, basically with an organizational unit, you kind of get what you would get with a subdomain, a division of authority and delegation and permissions, sort of a separation there. So it's a good way to organize your network in Active Directory around the way that a company is structured. Now, probably from your reading, you remember that companies can be structured by location or by function if they're broken into departments, or they can be in sort of a hybrid structure, combination of location and function, or function and location. We're going to do a hybrid structure for Super Spies, and this will be location and function. So we're going to have three locations, and here we'll create the parent OUs. So we'll have the Northern Hemisphere, and let's go ahead and add the Southern Hemisphere. And we'll get super high-tech, and we will add a lunar base. Our super secret spy lunar base on the moon that no one knows about except us and they, and only they know who they are. So here we have parent OUs, and they themselves are child objects of super spies. but they're nested inside, and we're going to create child objects. And we've structured it by location. Now within each location, we're going to structure it by function, so by department. And in this case, all of our our spy groups will have a top agents department, and we will also have a research department where we develop cool things like exploding pens and laser watches and other cool spy stuff. And we will have enemy agents that we need to keep track of, top agents, and also for our new recruits, trainees. And so again, we're broken down by location and function. These are child OUs, this is a parent OU, and also Super Spies is a parent OU that contains all of these, sort of our whole company, so to speak. So again, I just want to create the same structure here. I'm going to say new organizational unit, trainees, and new organizational unit, research, and I'm going to go new organizational unit, top agents, and new organizational unit, enemy agents. And we'll go to Lunar Base, and in Lunar Base, there are no enemy agents that we have to worry about on Lunar Base. So we're just going to have, and there are really no top agents there, so we'll just have research, and here will be a little bit different by job description or function. So we'll have research, and we will have surveillance. That's how you spell surveillance. I wouldn't know. Okay, so now we have our organizational unit structure with our parent OUs and our child OUs. We're going to need some administrators to administer each location. And if you broke this down into subdomains, in your FQDN you could have northernhemisphere.pirates.org, southernhemisphere.pirates.org. You could set up system administrators that way, but we've broken it down by organizational unit. We want to use a single domain and take advantage of a tremendous cost savings in terms of simplicity and fewer resources for our network. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll make our administrator. We'll say new and user, and this one will be nhadmin. nhadmin, and give him a password. And there he is, there's nhadmin, and we're going to create shadmin for Southern Hemisphere. And let's go ahead and create another user here, and this will be Lunar admin. Boy, wouldn't you like that job? Then again, maybe it'd be a lonely job, unless you could take your loved ones with you somehow. Hey, we'll be a super secret spy organization with a family plan. So now I have 3 different amends here. Let's look at different ways. There's 2 basic ways that you can delegate authority over an OU to an administrator for that respective location or function. You can use the first method, which is delegate control wizard, and we'll run that, and we just want to add, in this case, nhadmin, Northern Hemisphere admin. And you can go with these options, but this isn't really going to give him enough power to be a full. We want him to be a full-blown, total, independent, self-sufficient administrator for the Northern Hemisphere OU. So instead of choosing this, we're going to choose create a custom task to delegate. We're going to go over here, and we want to say this folder, existing objects in this folder, and creation of new objects in this folder. Anything that's nested inside of it, any child objects, we want him to have power over or the ability to administer. We're going to give him full control over everything to create child objects. Very important, so he can create sub-OUs or child OUs within his parent OU structure. User accounts, groups, whatever he needs to do in his location, he should be able to do without having to bug headquarters, right? Without having to, bug us. So now he's administrator of Northern Hemisphere. And I want you to look at the DACL. If you running that wizard, what that did is basically we added him, to the discretionary access control list, and now there are access control entries that permit him full control over that organizational unit. Now, if we look at the special permissions, 2008 a moment here. Look at the special permissions. Domain admins is still the owner, administrator and administrators. So he's not the owner, but he does have permission. He has all of the effective permission he needs to administer everything there. Then, of course, special permissions, if we wanted to set any other special permissions, they would be located there as well under Advanced View. So again, we'll do the same thing with Southern Hemisphere. I'm just going to run the delegation of control wizard. And let's go ahead and add sh admin. And create a custom task. I want to, go ahead and give permission or apply permission to child objects. I'm going to give him all the permissions and say finish. So now sh is set. And now we want to go, and this time instead of using the delegation of control wizard, I'm going to go to security. I'm going to say add. This does the same thing. And sometimes, I guess, depending on which way you look at it, maybe this is the easiest way to do it, but either way, that dog hunts, you can get the job done either way. Lunar admin, and then again, if we wanted to look at any other special permissions, we could modify those and set those here. So for lunar admin, notice in this case we've been allowed all permissions to do everything. So two different ways to basically do the same thing. I personally prefer editing ACEs on the DACL, but you might like the delegation of control wizard. So let's test this out. Again, let's just make sure on the DACL, here's NH, he's added, but not SH and not lunar. So he should have permission for his area, but nobody else's, his turf alone. Let's look at the Southern Hemisphere, and let's go over to the security tab. Okay, SH has permission on his turf, but not NH or lunar, so he's good. And let's go over here and look at lunar base. And look at the security tab, and there's lunar admin. He's got permission for his turf, but not for Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. So we should have three distinctively separate levels or layers of administration here in Active Directory. So let's test this out before we get into creating other users and groups and setting up our whole fictitious, exciting, intriguing super spy organization. Now, here's something I want you to see. You need permission to log on locally, and that's taken away by default. It's only granted to administrator and to backup operators on domain controllers. Now you can add it. We'll have to go ahead and edit the default domain controllers policy and add a group called domain users to it just to give this administrator permission to log on using his security account and credentials. And the reason is, again, let's look at his group membership real quick. We'll do Northern Hemisphere, NH admin. But if we look at, he's a member of domain users, but he's not a member of the administrators group. Now that's a security precaution because Microsoft figures that you don't want just any Joe Blow logging into your domain controller to your servers. They're pretty important to your organization. You don't mind if they log into their workstations, but you don't want them playing Pong or I almost said Space Invaders. I have to modernize here. You don't want them playing Half-Life or trying to install Unreal Tournament or something on some of your mission-critical domain controller servers, so they deny that permission. And we'll see that. Let's try to log in as NH admin. So other users, our domain is pirates, and let's try to log in as NH admin. Notice what it says. You cannot log on because the logon method you are using is not allowed on this computer. Please see your network administrator for more information. This is actually a group policy or security policy setting. So we need to go modify that, and we'll just temporarily relax our security, so to speak. Again, I guess in a real enterprise setting, you wouldn't want just anybody logging onto your domain controllers. You probably want to leave that intact, but we'll just disable it temporarily so we can kind of test our different levels of delegated authority. The way I'm going to do that, there must be 10 different ways to access the security settings and on a domain controller. My personal favorite, I like a Mickey Mouse console or MMC. I use the run command prompt a lot. Add the snap in. We're going to go down. We're going to look for group policy management, and that way I don't have to hunt for it. I can just type it. I don't know. Maybe it's a Linux thing or something. I just don't like hunting for things. What we want to do is open up domains and pirates arg. Pirates arg is our domain, and what we're interested in, or the policy we're interested in changing, is the default domain controller policy. And it's kind of, you'd think it's the default domain policy. It's listed higher up, but in the inheritance hierarchy, it doesn't matter. It's cumulative, but if you don't change the setting here, it doesn't matter what the setting is here. Matter of fact, I'll show you. If we click on edit in the GPMC, let's go to policies, Windows settings, security settings. Let's go to local policies and user rights assignment. Notice there's nothing defined here. You think it would be in the default domain policy, but it's not. It's in the default domain controllers policy. This is what you need to, again, if you want to allow users and other groups to log on to a domain controller, I guess that's fine for a lab setting. It may not be the best idea, in a real enterprise environment. You may want to choose not to let them log on to your domain controllers. So we need to modify this, allow logon locally. And we're just going to add a group here, domain users, and that's a default group. Any user account that you make, it's added to domain users. So this way we'll be able to log in locally on our 2008 server with anybody put in any group that we decide to create using Microsoft's wonderful strategy of AGUDLP. I'm going to not save the console, but I do need to do one more thing, and I usually just type this, GP update from the prompt, but I want you to see what happens or what's going on. So sometimes it's a good idea to do this, because then if there's a problem or there are errors, you'll get to see them. So whenever we change group policy, we want to type in GP update from a command prompt on our 2008 server, and now it's going to update the group policy settings. Tells us, okay, user policy update has completed successfully. And I want to exit out. And now I'm going to log out as administrator.
Let's log in and test our access control entries on the discretionary access control list.
And now let's see if we can log in as nhadmin. So I want to switch users, and I'm going to go ahead and go into pirates, nhadmin, Northern Hemisphere user. Let's type in his password. Now notice it's letting us log in. So now the Northern Hemisphere admin has local logon privileges on this domain controller. 2008. Please pardon me, I'm going to wet my whistle with a little bit of Diet Mountain Dew. Probably more information than you wanted. Okay, this is a brand new desktop now, and now we have Northern Hemisphere admin's desktop. Let's go ahead and make things a little more convenient for him. So we want to grab some shortcuts. We're going to go into Administrative Tools, and the three most common tools that Northern Hemisphere admin is going to use are going to be Active Directory Domains and Trust, Active Directory Sites and Services, and Active Directory Users and Computers. And we'll just pop all of those right there. And now let me go ahead and open up Users and Computers. And now it's asking me for credentials. In this case, I do have permission because I'm delegated authority, even though it's permission over only one OU. So let's test that. We don't want nhadmin messing around with shadmin's organizational units or things, or we don't want them messing around with lunar admins, or vice versa. We wouldn't want shadmin messing around with nhadmins. So we need a way of giving these guys permission to do everything that they want to do or need to do in their OU, but not giving them permission in other OUs where they don't belong, or where they shouldn't necessarily have permission. So first of all, let's check the Northern Hemisphere and see if we do have permission. We do. We have permission to create organizational units. So here I'll create a child OU. It came out chill instead of child, but that's alright. Now again, if I were to go and try to delete that, it's protected. I can't delete it, and notice I don't see it here. So why don't I see it? What do I need to do? Exactly. You're right. We need to check and enable advanced features. In my head, I'm just imagining that you said that, but if you If you were paying attention, you probably said that. Like, Germany, click on the freaking advanced features from the view menu. Anyway, okay. So now let's go ahead and look at that. Object and protect object from accidental deletion. Let's uncheck that, and now we can get rid of it. Gonna go ahead and get rid of chill. So now we know we can make users and groups, and we have been delegated full authority for Northern Hemisphere as NHMN. Now, can we do anything to lunar base? Nope. Don't even have the option to make anything. There's nothing new there. Can we do anything to the Southern Hemisphere? Nope. Don't have the option. There's nothing there. So we've successfully delegated authority to these three administrators by location. The lunar admin for the lunar base, NH admin for the Northern Hemisphere, and SH admin for the Southern Hemisphere. They each can modify things in their own OU, but they do not have permission to modify things in each other's OUs. And if we were to go out here to this container, again, they couldn't modify anything in a global container like users. I couldn't add anything. I wouldn't have permission to delete anything, because only if I were a member of the administrators group would I have permission for that. I'm not. NHadmin is only a member of the domain users group. Now, eventually, we might create some global security groups, and maybe we'll create a group called Lunar Admin and a group called NH Admin or something, and we could add them to those groups and just sort of further propagate permissions that way. But again, if I were, say we're going to try to delete something here, we'll just go to administrator. I do not have sufficient privileges to delete administrator, or that object's protected from accidental deletion. But I mean, that's a good thing. We don't want. Look, we only want NHadmin messing around in here. We don't want them over here, and we don't want them over here, and we certainly don't want them out here, because other things are going on there. So we've successfully delegated authority, and we've contained permissions into a specific area. That's the whole idea behind an OU. At least, in your ability to delegate permission and authority over an OU. Now, there are other things that go with OUs. When we get into group policy, you can apply group policy objects to an OU. So they're very useful that way.
Now let's log back in as administrator and practice some AGUDLP.
Okay, we log back in as administrator. And now we want to go ahead and create some users and add them to groups and follow Microsoft's AGUDLP strategy. And we'll start looking at permissions and things before we go into group policy. Before we do this, though, I'm having to use cryptic passwords, and that's a good thing for a secure network. You don't want simple passwords on a real network. But just to make things easier for me, I want to be able to use short passwords, simple passwords. I'm going to turn that option off. And the way to do that, I'm going to go ahead and launch a Mickey Mouse console, and in our Microsoft Management console, I want to go ahead and add my group policy management tool. And this time I want to edit. Let me go here, domains, pirates.org. Okay. And this time I want to edit my default domain policy, and I'm going to go here under computer configuration, Windows settings, security, and I want to look at account policies. Notice there are three policies here: password policy, account lockout policy, Kerberos policy. I'm interested in password policy. This is sort of the first item that I want to edit. Let's look at a couple of the options here. Store passwords using reversible encryption. That's been disabled because that's more secure. Makes them more difficult to recover, but also more difficult to reverse and decrypt that way. Password must meet complexity requirements has been enabled. I'm going to disable this. It's a good idea to leave it enabled. You shouldn't disable it, but I'm just going to disable it again to make things a little easier. What that does when it's enabled is it forces you to combine 3 of 4 categories for your passwords. And the categories are this: capital letters, lowercase letters, symbols, and numbers. So any combination of 3 of those would be considered a complex password. But if I just had, say, upper and lowercase, that's not complex. If I just had numbers and symbols, that's not complex. I'd have to have like a capital letter and a lowercase letter and a number, or a lowercase letter and a symbol and a number. But some combination of 3 of those 4. And that's good because it makes your passwords much more difficult to brute force and much more resilient against dictionary attacks. The minimum password length, I'm going to go ahead and change to 4 characters. Again, not a good idea in a real environment, but to make things easier in our lab, we'll just do that. Minimum password age is 1 day, and that just keeps them from changing their password 10 times in a day. That would be very annoying to you as an administrator, because they'd probably forget and have to call you and bug you 3 or 4 times, and that would interrupt your game of solitaire. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, we're very busy doing important things all day, aren't we? The maximum password age of 42 days means that they need to change their password. Just a few, a little bit more than a month, so maybe 10, 12 days more than a month, but that way they have to change their password. The more, the longer you have the same password, the more susceptible you are to a brute force attack. You give the hacker more time to try to build up a dictionary of words to try, or social engineer something to try to get a password, or to brute force something with software that just massively tries to compute all of the possible combinations in a password. So that helps increase your security. And enforcing password history, this is kind of a neat option. This just means that they won't be able to use the same password until 24 passwords later. And by then, hopefully, they've probably forgotten their first password. So those are some security settings. Here are some other security settings. Account lockout duration. It's not defined, but by default, we could make this less or more. But by default, if I define this and I say OK, then these are dependencies. It's also going to set an account lockout threshold. And what that'll do again is that cuts down on brute force attacks, because after 5 invalid logon attempts, it's going to lock my machine for half an hour before I'll be able to try again. Now that's annoying to the end user. They're mad because maybe they came in, they weren't paying attention, they typed in their password wrong 5 times, butterfingers, and now they have to wait half an hour before they can get into their system, or they have to call you on the phone and you have to unlock it, from one of your domain controllers. But it's great for a hacker, because a hacker who's trying to hack that account, if he was trying to brute force that account, he's only going to get 5 tries. And then the account's going to be locked out for half an hour. So it would take him forever to try to brute force that account. So it's actually a good idea to define an account lockout policy for that threshold. But I'm going to undefine it. Again, in a real environment, we would want this. We would want the security that we get from it. But in a lab environment, we're just going to simplify things to make things faster and easier. Hopefully so we can meet that 10-minute clip requirement on YouTube. Alright, we have changed these settings. I'm going to go ahead and close my management console.
Now we need to refresh group policy with GP update.
Now remember, we still need to do GP update. So I'm going to open up a command prompt again just so you can see what goes on. And this will refresh our group policy setting changes. So since we changed the default domain controller policy to allow users to log on locally, we also changed the default domain policy, the password policy, so we can have simple passwords. Once we perform the GP update, now we can actually create a password with something very simple like PASS. Let's go over here and let's go to Northern Hemisphere, and we don't want to give our top agents a simple password. We'll give our enemy agents simple passwords. Ha ha ha. So let's make a user, and Dr. Evil. Dr. Evil will be our user. Password, I'm just going to lowercase PASS. PASS. And that fits our minimum requirement of 4 characters. Now let's look at modifying that again. Just go to management console and again, let's go into our default domain policy. Now let's see what happened if we were to cut that back on. Say for security purposes, we'll go edit the GPO, the group policy object, and in Windows settings, security settings, let's go to account policies and our password policy. Password must meet complexity requirements. Let's go ahead and enable that. and that should be a minimum of at least 7 characters. And we'll leave that. Let's go ahead. And now we'll go on to Active Directory User Computers and try to create another user. And let's make another enemy agent. And who will we call our enemy agent? Barney Rubble. Pirates.org. Now let's try to use a simple password now. PASS. PASS is what I'm typing. Oh. Forgot to do my GP update. See what happens when you don't do GP update? We changed the policy, but it didn't take effect. I'm going to update the policy settings, GP update. But you guys are screaming, update the policy. Okay. Now, let's make another enemy agent. And again, we'll try to use a simple password. Let's do user and let's see. Fred Flintstone. And all simple lowercase PASS. Now notice what it tells me. Windows cannot set the password for Fred Flintstone because the password does not meet the password policy requirements. Check the minimum password length, password complexity, and password history requirements. So again, in this case, I would either have to use a complex password on Fred Flintstone, or I have to change my policy back. And I'm going to change it back. I just kind of wanted you guys to see that in group policy. And again, I'll just go ahead and add a snap-in and group policy management. And I got the resolution turned down pretty low here for a decent screen capture, but let's go ahead and edit the GPO group policy object, and I want to go to policies, Windows, security, and I want to go to account policies and password, and I'm going to disable complex passwords, and I'll set the minimum password to be 4. And I'm going to go ahead and close that, close that. Again, I want to do a GP update. And now let's go into Active Directory Users and Computers. And we'll make another agent with a simple password. Let's go make a trainee here. Make a trainee. And let's call our trainee Scooby. And Scooby at pirates.org. User cannot change password, and now all lowercase PASS. Not a very getting a cell phone call here. That's a text-to-speech engine on my cell phone. So anyway, pardon that. That's the text-to-speech engine on my cell phone, and I completely lost my train of thought now. I'll have to call her back in a minute. In this case, we've created Scooby, and he has a simple password, all lowercase, just 4 letters, PASS. So that's sort of an example of the password account policies and the local user logon and network logon privileges for users and groups in Active Directory.